Okay, today I wanted to cover lighting. So, start with I wanted to introduce the different lights to you and what you can do with them, what you can't do with them, whatever. And as a way of introduction to lights, what I decided to do was just to create a little still life here. So you can see with just a few objects how different lighting can look really, really different. Let me go ahead and save this object. So I haven't done that yet. Save object as. Save it on the desktop here. Content, objects. And since it's saved, I can now send it over to layout. And let's look at it from the camera view. Set up perspective. There we go. Let's move a little closer. Maybe go ahead and move the camera up a little bit. Rotate it. Oops, I didn't want to rotate that. Let me undo a few steps here. Oh, I wanted to select the camera, not that. There we go. Move it up a little bit. Rotate the camera a little. Move it a little bit so we can get a sense of our still life here. Maybe rotated it just a little bit too much. Be able to see all the sides. Okie doke. Simple still life. And light, when you use lights, the only place that you can use them are in layout. There are no lights in modeler. So what we can do to actually see where the lights are, and you can see that this light is actually right here. That's the little graphic representation of the light. If you're in a place in your scene where you don't see it, and you'll notice down here we have lights. We can select the lights from here as well. Is that I can switch back to perspective view. And you can see that by default the light is right next to the camera, right here. But we can move this light anywhere. And the thing that's interesting about this, let's go to light properties first to see what we have. And by default you're given a distant light. So that's the first light that you'll be familiar, everybody's familiar with. A distant light is equivalent to the sun. What does that mean? It means that it's just a big honking wall of light. And that's what the sun is, a big wall of light. And how does that translate is that you'll notice right now that the light is clearly in front of the scene, right? And it looks pretty believable that if the light is shining from here, this would be your light side, this is your shadow side. But watch what happens when I just simply move it behind it. It doesn't change, does it? It's still the same. It's just a big wall of light, like the sun. I mean, when you see this, the light here, you're thinking in terms of a spotlight, and that if the spotlight were behind all of the objects, they would be in shadow. But think of, even though it's a graphic representation, it's a little icon that represents the light. Think of it as the sun, a huge big ball of light. So the Earth, relative to the sun, it really doesn't matter where you move the light. It's going to light everything the same. Now, obviously for outdoor scenes, the distant lights work really well. Another distinct thing with distant lights is that the shadows that they create are really, really harsh. They're extremely crisp and sharp. And sometimes that works and sometimes that looks a little bit, it's kind of overboard. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, let's switch from perspective view back to camera view. Switch to render, and let's look at render options to make sure that we have shadows turned on transparency and everything else. We really don't need these others because I don't have reflections or anything. I just want to make sure that shadows are turned on and we have the image viewer here. Now go ahead and I'll render the frame. And as you can see, shadows are really pretty crisp. And there's no reflective light on any of this. So look in here, it creates this just black hole. But the shadows are crisp and sharp, and there's no fall off or anything. One of the things that we can do to remedy that, if we want to create more of a situation that looks like it's an indoors, we can still use the distant light. Is it again, go back to properties, is that we can change the intensity of the light, and that will affect it a little bit, but probably not the way that you would think. So watch what happens when I turn the intensity down to 50% or so. It just dims everything. It's not going to change the quality of the shadows. It may look like an afternoon or early morning light, but that's about it. Everything is much darker now, and the shadows are still, there's no fall off, no softness to them or anything. It just looks like we're looking at this in, probably early evening or something like that. So what we can do is, that's pretty much it. You'll notice for distant lights that intensity fall off can't be changed, and that's what that is here. Fall off is, what that means is that the best way is to use an example, is that I think it would equate to lumens or candle power in physics. That, for example, with the intensity or the fall off turned off, that if we had somebody with a candle 100 yards away at the other end of a football field, we're at one end and they're at the other, with no fall off, that candle could throw an intense amount of light. It could light all sorts of stuff. But typically, what you would want to see with a candle is that 100 yards away, you could see the light, it would be visible, but it wouldn't illuminate anything because you're too far away. So that would be the fall off. It only has a specific range that light can affect it, that light can affect the objects. Does that make sense? A candle would probably only have a few feet. Think of a birthday cake with lots of candles around it, and you turn off all the lights and you take a photograph, it really only illuminates a few feet around the birthday cake, and that's about it. So that's what fall off will do. But with a distant light, because we have the sun, that's what it is, there is no fall off. It's just full-blown intense light. We can change, though, the distance that affects it. By default, sorry, can't change it. It can't change the distance either. I misspoke. What we can do, though, with this light is we can rename it. So if you're trying to create an environment where maybe we're on this planet that has two suns or something, you can name it Sun 1, Sun 2, things like that. So we can rename the current light, and it will show up down here. Instead of item light, you'll have all the other ones here. So if I rename this here and I name it Sun 1, you'll notice that it changes down here under item, because we can add numerous lights to our scenes. We can also change the color of the light. Right now, it's the default intense white light. But what if, like this, if I set up this situation, let me turn this back to like a 50%, and I want to create sort of an evening scene, and maybe it has sort of a blue-violet kind of light that I'm creating. I can go ahead and click here and create more of a blue-violet-y kind of light. And notice how it affects the entire scene now. This can bathe the entire scene in some and unify everything in a way that you wouldn't normally think. And lighting can do that really nicely, really, really nicely. You can create some nice effects. So for morning lights or afternoon lights or warm lights, cool lights, you can change it any way you want. Okay, so that has to do with, we can change the color of the light. If I turn the intensity to 0 and I render it again, are we going to see anything? You still see this. You see a silhouette of it. Why do you think you see, if the lights are turned off, a light, if it's turned off, why do you think we see a silhouette of our scene? There's something called ambient light that you have to be aware of. Ambient light, you're typically more aware of it indoors than you are outdoors. Indoors, for example, we're in a room with no windows. There's no windows over there. There's no windows out there. There is light coming through here. So when you turn off all the lights here, if we were to turn off all the lights there, all the lights there, gradually your eyes get acclimated to the environment and you see. If you can see, then that means some light is coming in here, bouncing through here somewhere. And that's what this represents. This is the ambient light. And where you can change that is something called global illumination. By default, ambient light, or ambient intensity as it's called here, is set to 5%. You can also change the color of it too. So if you want the ambient light to be a little bit warm and you want it to bathe everything in a little bit of a yellow light to give it kind of that Vermeer look, or Rembrandt, so everything is bathed in a nice warm light, you can do that from here. However, if I turn this down to 0, you're not going to be able to see anything now. I would not use any more than 5% ambient light, or it's kind of a quick fix. It will illuminate everything, but it'll make everything so equally lighted that it will wash out shadows. Let me just show you. Let's crank this up to maybe 20%, 25%. So let's render it again and you'll see what it looks like. That doesn't, oh, that's still with all the lights turned off. So I got to go back here. I forgot. Never mind. Let's close this. Let's go back to our light setting. Instead of 0 intensity, let's crank this up to 100%, what we had before, and let's render it again. Notice how bright and intense everything is. If you try to compensate for your lighting by cranking up the ambient light, it tends to make everything a little bit too bright, a little bit too intense. So I would not do that. Now if I go back and I look at global illumination, and let's do this once again, I'm going to turn it down to 5%. And let's render it again and let's compare. This looks a little bit more believable. Everything isn't quite as intense. Okay, you don't have the really hot whites except where your highlights are, and that's what you want. If we compare this with the last one, notice that all of our highlights are washed out. Everything is too bright. This would be pretty much what you would see on a really intense, bright, sunny day, but I still don't think I would use that. I would maybe crank up the intensity a little bit more, or try something a little bit different. I would not change the ambient light to more than 5%. So let's try a different kind of light now. We have our distant light, which is like the sun. We can change the color of the light. We cannot have any fall off. We can't change the range, the distance that it affects objects, because it's just one big ball of light. But what we can do is we can come back now and let's look at the light. Well, what am I doing? Properties, let's look at the light. Instead of distant light, you'll notice that we have others. We have a point light, which some of you have already used for the table and lamp. We have a spotlight, we have a linear light, and we have an area light. The point, let me go over these one by one and we'll we'll swap each of these to compare. Point light is like an incandescent bulb. It's a little ball of light. And the effect that it has is about like an incandescent bulb. It doesn't have that great a distance that it will affect something. I mean, a 100-watt bulb, a 500-watt bulb will really light up a room, but out in an open field, it's not going to do a whole lot. So that it has a limited range. A spotlight is a cone of light. Okay, it's as if it comes from it comes from a single source, but it spreads out into a cone, as a cone, and at the end of it, it's like think of a Klieg light, or think of a typical spotlight. It starts from a single small source and spreads out into a cone-like shape. We can, with spotlights, control, as with point lights, the fall off. We can control the distance that it affects the object. We can also control the shadows with spotlights, in that a spotlight, if we wish, can have a really crisp edge or it can have a fuzzy edge. And we can control how much, how fuzzy that edge is. So we'll do that in a minute. Linear lights are like fluorescent lights. What they are is an array of point lights. So they are 4 point lights in a row. A distant light, or an area light, is an array of linear lights. So it's 4 linear lights in a grid. So what this simulates is, if anybody's had photography, is one of those nice big box lights that projects a nice soft area of light, and it creates some really nice soft shadows. What I really want to point out with each of these, starting with a spotlight, if I switch to a spotlight, is the kind of shadow that you get. You'll notice that this is no longer a big open ray of light. Just changing the light and rendering it, we'll see something altogether different. Notice that it's kind of turned off to the side a little bit. It's not quite what we had before. Not everything is illuminated anymore. This is part of the cone that I was talking about that has kind of a fuzzy edge. Notice that the shadows are still pretty crisp, but already you're notice by changing the type of light, you begin to get a different kind of mood or feel in here. You know, just by changing the light, it can alter the way you perceive the scene, I mean, tremendously. Another thing that's nifty about these lights too, if you really want to point a light at a specific object, when we're looking at it through the camera view, it's really hard to tell. You can see these rays of light shine, but you don't know what the heck it's pointing at. Even when we switch back to perspective view, you can see that it is turned away, and we can select the light, and we can hit Y for rotate. Now we can kind of turn it around, and you can see that how it affects it. But you're really not sure what it's pointing at. Mm-hmm.
Okay. With shadows, will it always be accurate and the same when compared to other computers with different graphic cards, or will it be more accurate?
No, it'll all be pretty much the same. It really tries to simulate actual lights, what you're doing. Okay. So it will be pretty consistent. But what we can do, notice we have perspective view. We also have something called light view under here. Remember, we've had top view, bottom view, back, front, right, left, perspective, camera view. We also have light view. So what we're doing now is we're looking through the light. So it's as if you were, I don't know, what are lighting people called in theater? They have a technical name, gaffers, or I don't know, something. Maybe lighting people. I'm sure there's some special name that they have. And it's as if you were up there, right behind the light, looking down there, seeing what it's pointing at. You'll also notice this little dotted line around here. This is the fuzziness of it. This is also, you see the angle of the cone, or you see this circle that represents that cone, the end of the cone. And you can control the angle of that. If you want a spotlight, a really tight, intense spotlight, we can tighten that up. Or if you want more of a broad spotlight, we can widen the angle of it. Again, we can make a nice fuzzy, soft fuzzy edge around here, or we can make it a really crisp edge. It all depends on what you want. To change it, now that we've changed this to a spotlight, we, again at the bottom now, select lights, and we go back to properties, and we'll notice down at the bottom here, here's our spotlight, light properties. You'll notice here we have spotlight cone angle. By default, it's 30 degrees. But watch when I use the spinner, and now I broaden it, 45. See how much more it takes in? And if I dial it down to 20 degrees, it's a much narrower angle, a tighter cone, a smaller, narrower cone. You can also change the soft edge angle. By default, it's 5 degrees. If you want to broaden this to 20, or you want absolutely none, so it goes out to the edge. See how this little dotted line is changing in here? So if I wanted a really fuzzy edge, let's just try that, and I've got it pointed at that angle. Let's go back to camera view, and let's go ahead and render the frame. Okay, so it's a real fuzzy edge. It's a very tight, very, pointed at just a specific area. And every time you change this, it really dramatically changes the mood, the feel of this scene pretty dramatically, just by subtle little things, doing subtle little things. One other thing you can do with spotlights that you can't do with other lights is you can project images from them, which can be really pretty cool. You can also add atmospheric haze. You know, when you're in a theater, or even now, you see the little particles when somebody is smoking who's not supposed to be smoking, and you see the smoke going through the light, and it's those particles that make the light visible. We can add that effect. That can be really pretty cool. So when you're trying to create an outdoor scene, and maybe you want to have street lamps, and they're projecting down, and you want to see that fog or that haze at night, you can add that. So there's lots of things that we can do with these. It doesn't take a lot of work. It takes time to tweak it to get the desired results, but it can really enhance a scene dramatically and enhance your product or whatever by using some of these features. So let's go ahead in here, and let's go ahead and start by projecting an image from this. So I'm going to go ahead, and where it says projection image down here, I'm going to go ahead and load image. And now I got to find an image. So let me go to my desktop. Let me find one here. Maybe I have one. Let's take Mike. Let's go ahead and add Mike and have him projected. Okay, he's going to be projected from the light. We'll go ahead and click open. In OpenGL, you do not see anything. But watch what happens when I render the frame now. Pretty cool, huh? So wherever you point the light now, it's projected onto all these surfaces. So it's just what we're doing here. That's what you're doing with that. It's no different. And as I mentioned, we can also add some atmospheric haze here. This is called, you can add a lens flare. People kind of go overboard with lens flares. What I would like to do though is I'm going to go ahead and add some volumetric lighting. And we can click here for volumetric light options. Let's go ahead and select quality, medium. Let's fade the fog in. And let's opacity, cast shadows. Nah, I'm going to leave that. And I'm going to leave these default settings just to see what we get. And then we can go back and tweak it and see what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead and render the frame, see what we get. Now, you can begin to see the light here. It's as if you see the little streams of light of the image projected. Onto the surface. So we can control the luminosity, we can control opacity, we can control all sorts of stuff in here. The density is 100%. If you only want to see a hint of this when it's done, You know, if you don't want to see all of the streaming light, which is pretty cool. You know, it can be a really neat effect in the right situation. We can come back and let's dial this back to maybe 50%. So it's not quite so intense. That's close enough. I'm going to try opacity cast shadows. I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like, so I'll be surprised along with the rest of you. Notice also every time we add one of these features, it typically adds to the render time. Notice that it isn't quite as intense as what we had before. It's starting to be a little bit lighter. What did I, okay, hold on one second. I added volumetric, this is volumetric lighting. Now, if I turned off, okay, so notice that it's not quite, by dialing that back, okay, notice it's a little bit more transparent, it's not as intense, so you can control that. What I used is over here, volumetric lighting. Now, if I select no image and I render this again, you're still going to see streams of light. You're still going to see kind of a foggy light, but you're just not going to see the projection on here. And again, it's the last thing to be rendered. You see the light projected on here. Now, you would really see a difference maybe if I change the color of the light a little bit too. So it appears to be kind of a foggy haze in here. So you actually see some of the light. Now, useful for stage lighting, useful for street lamps, things like that. Car lamps at night where you see the streams of light, where you see particles, you know, reflected in the light, fog, haze, moisture, that sort of thing. So that can be pretty nifty too. I'm going to dial this back too. That's 10 meters. I'm going to try this. 5. So maybe this won't extend all the way to the end. Let's go back. I always cut these in half to see what result I'm going to get. Render it again. Notice it's not quite as intense because the height of it has been halved. You see less and less of this fog by dialing it back a little bit. So if you compare this with the last one, see that? It's still there, just not as intense. You can see that we have nice soft edges here and that sort of thing. So we can come back and control all of that. Pretty nice. Okay, so those are spotlights. You can project images from spotlights. There's also something that's nifty too with spotlights. Let's go back and I'm going to project a different kind of image here. What if you want to create a scene, and this is, if you look at my student website or student examples on my website, there's one of a clock. Has everyone seen that one? And it looks like there's light coming through a window. Is it just me or is the web sort of slow? Everybody see the new MacBooks? Pretty nice. Same price as the old ones, they're just they're pretty cool. They've added some nice features. I'm seriously thinking of getting one. This one's 4 years old, going on 5. So I think it's time. But go to Kirk's classes. Let's look at artwork. Sorry for everything being so slow. Just It slows down dramatically as the morning progresses. In fact, they dial it back because they don't want all of you downloading movies and watching YouTube and stuff, and it's discourage everybody from doing that. But then when you're in the classroom, it makes it really difficult for us to do what we're supposed to do. Oh well, you know. Notice how it looks like light is streaming through a window in this one. Okay. Well, this is nothing more than a projection map from a spotlight. All you need, similar to bump maps, transparent maps, and things like that, is a black and white image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this. I'm going to go back here, and remember the images that I used for my window? Let's go ahead and load an image. Go back to content, and I go to images. I thought I put it in here. Where did I put it? Maybe I have it on, just have it on my desktop. Shoot. Oh, here's it. It was the window demo. Okay. Images, window. Let me try just the window panes. This one. Okay. So I have the window panes, and I'm not sure whether I have to invert it or not. You know. So I'm going to go ahead and project it. Go ahead. Whoops, I didn't want Viper. Let's go ahead and render frame. There we go. See how it's projecting all the background part of that as well? That's not what I had hoped, but you get the basic idea. So if you had a square image, and if you had nothing but the crosshairs in it, it would look like it's projecting. No, it would be the reverse, right? You would have, there we go. What we would have to do, let me just do it. You get the basic idea. It looks like, sort of looks like light is being projected through a window, but not exactly. Maybe if I were to use the window frame instead. No, that won't, none of those will work. Because what I have to do is go back to Photoshop. And I'm going to open one of those images. So it's allowing, the black is blocked. So I need it reversed. I need just the black there. Okay. Let's go File, Open. Go to Window. Let's go to Window Panes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the size of all of these. Key for transform. And I'm going to enlarge this like so. Okay. I'm going to make all of these black. So, rather, make them all white. Take the background and make it all black. Select all. Okay, so this will be the frame. File, save as, go ahead and save it as a TGA file, Targa file. Save it in there. Let's go back to our scene. Let's load image. And I should have my projection. Now let's render it again. Let's see what we get. There we go. So now it looks like light is shining through a window, right? Onto our scene. If you want to make the window bigger, remember I selected a very narrow angle for that light. Just broaden it. Notice you can see some of the streaming light coming through the window. Can be pretty neat. So again, this is a simple but effective approach. It could also be if you wanted Venetian blinds, things like that. Without having to build the Venetian blinds, you're just building a map, projecting that light through the map onto a surface to create that overall look. So that can be really, really effective. So let's try some other lights now. Okay, we've worked with spotlights. Let's try linear light. Linear light is a little bit, it's not as limiting or limited in its projection as a spotlight. But the noticeable difference it will give you now, because it isn't really like, it is like fluorescent lights, but it's not, is that when you're showcasing an object and you really want nice soft shadows that you would see indoors rather than the harsh shadows that you would see outdoors, the shadows that are created from linear lights and area lights are much different, and I think really, really nice. Now watch what happens. Everything is bathed in the light, and notice how the lights are the shadows rather, are much softer. Notice how they start to feather at the edge. Notice how everything here is softened. It isn't quite as harsh as it was before. Similarly, if I were to switch from a linear light to an area light, it will have more light, but the shadows will be even nicer and a little bit even softer. So I'm going to switch again from linear light to area light. Should probably move the light a little bit, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and render the frame. So notice that it's a little bit brighter because we have 4, remember, area lights are an array of linear lights. There's 4 of them, so it is much more intense. I'd probably want to dial it back. But look at how nice and soft the shadows are. So it really looks like it's an indoor, more of an indoor lighting. And that's much different than using something like the point light, which is nothing more than a ball of light. And if we render the frame here, see how the edges of the shadows are still relatively harsh? Now, I did select point light, didn't I? I don't know why that's pointing over here. It's kind of bizarre. Okay. And remember, for all of these lights, you can change the color of them. We can change the fall off. We can determine the range of them, intensity. These intensity fall offs are similar to the fall offs that we have used for the modification tools. Notice that we have linear. We can do inverse distance, so that linear, it's fall off. The normal range is 1 meter. But if we dial this way back to maybe a half a meter or so, or even a quarter of a meter, watch what happens. Let me switch from point light to linear light again. Now watch what happens when I render it. It'll be really, really, it's like it's in the middle of the night. So the fall off, this is like the candle I was telling you about. The distance is hardly anything at all. Let's crank it up to 500 now. And now let's see the difference. Not too much. Let's go back up. Let's crank this up again to 3/4 on the frame. Not too much of a difference. Let me go back up to 1 meter. Probably have to extend it even beyond with that fall off, because I don't know the distance of the light from the objects. Let's render the frame. Well, in this case, fall off isn't getting us anywhere. I really have to turn up the range considerably, and I need to know the distance from the light. There we go. The range now is 7.5 meters, which means that the light is probably a little bit less than 7 meters away from the still life. So you have to know that when you use fall off and you change the range and distance that it's effective, you have to know the approximate distance of the light from the object in order for that to make sense. And if I go back here now and I turn that leave this the same. Look at the range is 7 meters. Now if I turn this off and leave the range alone, watch the difference and how intense this will be. Without the fall off, it's just a constant intensity of light. There is no, gradual diminution of the intensity of it. But all of these lights can make a dramatic difference in how your scene looks. The last thing that I wanted to show you, I'm going to delete this scene and show you a scene that's available to all of you in classic content that's really useful for showing or showcasing products. And that's sort of what you're doing right now, the toy. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to clear the scene. And I'm now going to load a scene. And let me show you where it is. So I need to go to the hard drive. I need to go into Applications. I'm going to scroll down to Lightwave 8. I'm going to look in Content. I'm going to look in Scenes. Now, I got to remember where it is myself. I'm going to look in Benchmark for a minute. Nope, that's not it. How about... Now I got to remember what folder they put it in. Yeah, it should be in Scenes and Classic Content. Dynamics, Effector. Content. Oh, never mind. That's why. Thank you very much. Now let's go on here. I think it's in blotchy. There we go. It's Stage Light. Nope, not there. Let's look in Benchmark. Nope, not there. How about Many Things? Oh, I can never remember where they put stuff. How about Setup? Nope. Tutorial? Could be in there. Not in there. Okay, where are you? Features? I'm probably looking right at it and not seeing it. It's right here. It was under blotchy. Light Stage, under blotchy folder in Classic Content, it's light stage. So open it up, and it's not going to be able to find everything. It's looking for this ground bowl. So yes, now I have to go back again, go back to the hard drive, go back to applications, go on inside the folder Lightwave 8, select content, classic content. This time I'm looking for objects. I'm going to look in blotchy, and here is my ground bowl. And that's just what it is a big bowl. Now, when you're looking at it from this point of view, you don't see much. But when we look at it from perspective, you can see it's this big bowl. Now look at all the lights. That's why I have you in here. The reason that the bowl is in here is that it doesn't have any crisp edges. So that when you set your objects in here, you don't see any seams. And you're focused just on a neutral environment for it. But notice the lights that we have in here. If we switch to lights down at the bottom and we look, we have one key light, one light at the top, we have a fill light, we have a backlight, and we have key light number 2. So there's 3, 4, 5 lights. And you'll notice all the different kinds of lights that they have in here. If we look at key light 1, and let's look at properties, it's an area light. It's this one right here. Then just behind that key light, if we look at key light 2, it is in fact a spotlight. So they have an area light to soften the shadows. They have a spotlight to actually make the light a little bit more intense so that it really illuminates the object. Then we have, to bathe the overall scene in a little bit of light, they have an area light up here. That's our top light. The light in the back is to soften the shadows behind it, to fill in some of those shadows, is a fill light. That should be back here. That's the back light. And then we have the one over here, which is, wait a minute. That's our backlight, sorry, and this is our fill light. Okay, so let me load an object in here, and we'll render it, and you'll see what it looks like. So what I can do, and this is what I recommend, that if you want to take your toy and you want to use this scene, open this scene up, and then what we can do down here is I want to go back to items, and I want to add. Okay, what I'm going to add is I'm going to add an element here. And why can't I see what I want to add? I want to load it, sorry, I don't want to add, I want to load an object. Let me see, let me find something somewhat interesting here. Let's take, I'm going to go back again to the classic content, try to find something. Let's take Lightwave 8, content, classic content. Let's go to objects. Let's look at some household items. How about an office item here? How about a box of pencils? What the heck? See what it looks like. Now let's go back to camera view. And it looks pretty small, doesn't it? So now we got to make sure that we select the camera. We move the camera up. We zoom in. Move the camera up. Zoom in. Doesn't look very interesting, does it? Just a rectangle. I hope they did a little bit with the shading of this thing. I guess we could rotate this around so we could see the other part of this. Let's go ahead and select this, hit rotate. T for move. Go back to camera. Okay, let's see what we get here. I'm just going to render the scene as is. I was hoping this would be a little bit nicer than it is. Oh, well. Oh, it is pretty nice. There we go. They did add a nice surface to the box. I was hoping they would. Notice because of all the lights, it's taking quite a bit longer to render, even with a single pass. So let's go ahead and move that over. Don't I have? Shoot. Okay, let's look at render options. I have image viewer. So where did I put the image viewer? Come out wherever you are. Turn off Viper. That's not it. Where did the image viewer go? Let me render it again. Oh, okay. They just changed the size of it. That was why. That was what we had. Oh, sorry about that. Let's go to render options. Instead of 320, I want 640 by 480. I want to see something a little bit bigger. But it creates a nice, again, kind of an optimal lighting situation, one that you would have in a studio, you know, a photographer's studio who's setting up a product shot. And if you want to use this for your toy or your final project, you're more than welcome. I've used this any number of times. So the lights are already set up for you pretty nicely. If you want to change the color of the bowl or use something other than a bowl, that's pretty nice, but your 5 basic lights are set up pretty nicely for that. And you get the nice soft shadows, and the soft shadows come from those area lights. It's probably, for some people's taste, probably a little bit too evenly lit all the way around, but again, for a product shot, one that you would see in an ad, one that you would see in a brochure, it's really the ideal lighting situation. Okay, so I wanted to point that out, and it's helpful to deconstruct it. You can always turn lights off. So if you want to see what it looks like with just some of the lights, that will work too. We can always go back to lights in here, and we can look at them under properties, light properties. And when we look at the objects, something that I haven't pointed out that you can pay attention to with each of these is that when you look at the light properties, at the bottom, here are your basic settings. You can, if you want, in some cases they have turned the shadows off. Because if they had all of the 5 lights casting shadows, you have, it looks like a fluorescent light. Each one, after a while, is going to cancel the other one out, or you have too many, shadows going in too many different directions. You can also decide which objects you want the light to affect. And you'll notice that they turned off the box of pencils. If I turn off the ground plane as well, notice what's going to happen. Okay, that's the fill light. Let's go back to the key light again, and notice it's excluded both the pencils and that. The top light, we have, let's go ahead, the fill, the backlight. If I turn off the ground plane, key light 2, and it's exclude. Let me go back and exclude a bunch of these. I'm not paying attention to. just to see by turning, I'm randomly turning some of these off. I'm going to have it exclude the ground plane altogether. So the only thing that is lighted is the box. Now let's render it. So even though it's on a ground plane, notice that the light is only affecting the box of pencils because I turned it off for all of those other objects. So there's a lot that you can tweak and control in here and change. Even with this basic setup, you can go back and change all sorts of things if you want. You can go back and change the colors of the lights, the positions. I wouldn't change the positions of the light. I would put your object in the center of that environment and make it work with the lights that are in there. You can always change the size of the object too, that I can make this pencil box bigger than before. And because there's nothing next to it, you're not going to know how big the box is. It'll just look like a regular old. Probably gone overboard with this. I should probably reload the scene because one of these that had it exclude one of these, and I don't remember which one it was. I think it was the original key. No. Just close it and open it up. Anyway, that's basics of lighting. As you can see, without doing too much, you can really enhance your scene or you can really muck it up. One of the two. So it's something with your toy along with the surfaces I'd like you to consider. You know, beefing it up a little bit rather than just relying on the standard single distant light. Try some other lighting types to get different shadows. Maybe try a fill light. Try putting your toy inside this, light stage and see what result you get. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. Try a variety of things. I think what I'm going to do on Monday to follow up on lighting a little bit, because oftentimes I forget to cover it, is Sky Tracer. Sky Tracer, this would be useful for indoors. Sky Tracer would be useful for outdoors. So what Sky Tracer will allow you to do is to set up a specific time of day, lighting conditions for the sun. Are there clouds? You can have clouds, you don't have to have clouds. Do you want low-level clouds? Do you want high-level clouds? It can even be so specific that maybe, for example, you built a model of Stonehenge, and you want to know what Stonehenge looked like 5,000 years ago at that particular place on this earth at a particular date and a particular time of day. You can dial all of those factors in. And it will give you the setting, that exact setting. Pretty wild. What it is, it's used for things like that, but it's also used for architectural renderings, because oftentimes what they will do is that they'll take a photograph of the street where a building is to go. And the client wants to see, what is this building going to look like in the context of this street. So when they take the photograph, they'll note the conditions, the day, the time, position of the sun, all that sort of thing. And then when they build the scene in Lightwave, just like we did the other day with compositing, they will composite their model with that image that they've taken of the overall street. And then to match the lighting, what they'll do is that they'll use a distant light and they'll dial in those settings. This is the day it was taken. This is where it was taken. It was in Los Angeles or New York or Paris or wherever. And this is the date and the time of day to match the position of the sun so that all of the shadows will match. So that can be pretty nice too. It's pretty amazing. It doesn't take a lot of work to do it, but just to let you know where all these settings are. And if you want to create a nice sunset with fluffy clouds and things like that in the background, that's what Sky Tracer will do. There's a lot of presets that you can use. You can open them up, render it. It takes a lot of time when you use Sky Tracer. When you're happy with the setting with Sky Tracer, maybe one of the things that you'll do that we'll talk about is Shader Baker, is that once it's rendered, you'll bake that background, and so that when it renders it again, it's just going to use it as a still image. It's not going to render all the lights and the settings again in the clouds, and it will speed up the time or reduce the amount of time that it takes to render the scene. That might be something to consider too. So that would be pretty cool. Okay, so we'll cover that on Monday. Okie doke, that's it for lighting today. By the way, I'm having problems with Google Video uploading my videos. For whatever reason, some of the uploader isn't working.